Welcome to Connections, a podcast from the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. Our goal is to have discussions and messages that encourage us and strengthen our faith. We appreciate you joining us. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thank you for joining us on Connections. We're grateful that you're spending time with us. This is a podcast designed for spiritual conversations that we're hoping can be an encouragement to you. And I'm grateful today that we have Nick Fowler with us, and I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. But Nick has been a friend of mine for a long time, and I've always been thankful for and impressed by his ministry and his service. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation where we're going to get to spend some time thinking not only about experience in mission work, but also about some of the insights that brings to our own context and where we are wanting to serve God here. So I'm glad you've joined us, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. I guess I'll start off by just letting you kind of introduce yourself to us and sort of talk about not only where you are in ministry, but kind of how you got there.
Okay. All right. You want me to say it to them?
Sure.
Okay.
To them or me, either way's good.
Well, you know all this.
Right.
So,
That's true.
My name is Nick Fowler, and that's already been said. Sorry. I don't know how to do this stuff, Chad. You're just
This is great. You're doing great.
Hey, glad to be with you today.
Yeah.
So because I think it's going to be pertinent to our discussion, I'll tell you a little bit about what ministry has looked like for me the last 25 years. And that is a couple of roles in rural congregations in Tennessee for 7 years. And one of those was a youth ministry specific role. And then 8 years really total in ministry in North Brazil. And then 8 years now this week, 8 years back in the United States, doing a church restart in suburban Nashville. So those 3-4 different areas of service are going to affect, I think, the way we converse today. I have a lovely wife that's been with me the whole way, 2 amazing kids, and I've always worked with excellent elders, just wonderful, good elders all the way through. So
that's awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. And just reminded of that, a few weeks ago, we had our Future Minister Camp here. And just for those Graymere folks out there, Jonah, your son, was one of our campers and did an awesome job. And getting ready for this is his senior year.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in the same boat there as far as parents of seniors. That's a new thing. But I thought if you could share with us some of the journey. You mentioned being in Brazil, in Belém, Brazil. If you could tell us a little bit about that area, and then just about in your work there, some of the things you learned, things we wouldn't know if we'd never been there, if we hadn't lived there.
Okay. Belém is North Brazil. It's at the end of the Amazon River, kind of where it dumps right out into the ocean. It's a jungle area, but the city's 2.2 million people. They do all live right on top of each other. So you're in a metropolitan, and we had about 40,000 people that lived on our city block. So
wow.
You're covered up with people all the time, and it is one of the poor areas of Brazil, and the separation between those of affluence and the haves and the have-nots was great, as well as the prejudices on both sides against each other. Religiously, it's an interesting mix of Spiritism and traditional Catholicism and Pentecostalism, and where all those things kind of meet together in Brazil. Belém's a really good picture of that. People are extremely religious for the most part, but they're going to fall into one of those camps, or maybe all 3 of the camps sometimes.
So I'm sure it would have been shocking if you're going from where you had been living, and really where you'd grown up, and we've lived several places, but in the South, and then you go to thousands of people in your one city block.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that transition like?
Well, that's funny because before Freed-Hardeman, I lived like 14 miles outside of Winchester,
Yeah.
And then I went to Freed-Hardeman. We were right in the middle of town, but it's like Henderson, Tennessee.
Right. Yeah.
But I still felt like I was in town for the first time. And then for missions training, we went to Sunset to go through the school missions at Lubbock at Sunset International Bible Institute. And to be in a big city, that was huge.
Yeah.
That was like, for this old country boy, that was huge. And we moved from there to Mount Juliet before going to the field, and then from Mount Juliet to the Metropolitan. And all of this was a shock along the way. And every bit of it has been eye-opening for experiential learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I know we talked a little bit about even finding some of those areas that were in the jungle, connected to the outdoors, but where you could kind of get away from people.
Yes.
For some time during the week, or maybe for a day off, kind of.
Well, when God made people, where did he put them? He made Adam, Genesis 2, he made Adam, and after he's made, he puts him in the garden. Eve is made in the garden. But neither of those places are like developed villages or metropolitan areas. So, for me, coming from the country, it's been easiest to pay attention to and focus on spiritual things and on God in a place without human-made distractions. That's still true for me today. I know that's not for everybody, and I'm not one of these people that's saying God only shows up in the wilderness. That's not true biblically or historically, but it was important to me when I lived there to be able to find a way to go get a break. From people and into nature. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
And you did some of that with me, I think, when we were.
Yeah. I got to visit there. I can remember, having known you through all the training, I knew that you guys were taking Portuguese and were really preparing. But then when we went over there to visit, and the first time I heard you stand up and speak in Portuguese, it just really threw me off. I was like, oh, wow, you really learned it.
I remember that.
You really learned this. Is crazy.
Yes.
But yeah, and I know,
especially after we took Greek together, you're like, you were surprised I could learn another language.
That was, yeah. We probably, neither of us probably focused as much in that Greek class as we could have. But I know there were several things that we talked about, even while we were there, some of those culture shock moments, some of the differences between culture there and what we would think of as American culture. And different places in the States are different, but there are also a lot of things that we all have in common. So what were some of those moments, some of those kind of culture shock moments where you're like, oh, this is different. I've got to adjust to the way things are done.
Yeah. Culture shock moments. Well, the lack of etiquette on the roads, which maybe Nashville's kind of caught up with Blaine. That was probably the biggest day-to-day struggle for me. I remember at least one day I just lost it while in traffic, and I won't go into the details, but it was very bad. It was very, very bad. Adjusting to the heat initially was difficult. The first year and a half we lived without any type of air conditioning. And then after our first furlough back, the members at Mount Juliet helped us get air conditions in the bedrooms.
Yeah.
So that really increased quality of life. But, I guess the biggest thing is, other than these things you would experience on a vacation or travel differences, the biggest thing is the way people think, how they process, how they make decisions. And when you're planting a church and you're trying to plant the seeds of the word and the gospel, to watch how those are processed differently.
Yeah.
You know, down there, I would say there's a lot more group processing that happens because of their value on their community and their family. I feel like in my experience in the United States, I feel like religion is it's kind of an individual decision and focus. So when you're planting the gospel and it's new and it's different, it's really hard to find people that are willing to commit contrary to what they've always thought, always believed, or what their current community and family adheres to, because they all get reviled, spoken against, and despised when they make the decision to really focus in on God's word and live counterculturally, and that includes counter-religiously to a lot of them.
Yeah. So, and you had mentioned that it's a very religious place in a sense, but it falls into those categories you talked about, those spiritual categories. So, stepping outside of that, I guess that if that group dynamic, what the group wants is so important, it's hard for people to step outside of their group.
Yeah.
And I think I see the individual side of things definitely in the States. We tend to think more like individuals and make decisions kind of like individuals. So I guess this could give you a different perspective because you were there 7.5, 8 years.
Was in country 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah, we spent almost a year on the front end getting ready to go as well. So that was part of that ministry period of my life, the mission part.
And helped establish a congregation there that is still there and working. And we were talking earlier about you getting to go down and visit with them. So that's really neat. As you came back from that culture to the States, and you're looking at ministry and church in the States, what are some things that you saw differently after living away for that amount of time?
Well, I have an answer, but I don't know that it's a direct answer to that question. So let me just throw out, let me just regurgitate some things that are going on up here in my mind. And that is, I was always a very confident minister pre-Brazil. And going down there and doing ministry, there was a work that God did in me that broke a lot of that confidence down because maybe it was ego-based. And so I think there was a part of me that had to be crushed and crushed out so that God could come in and fill that place. So there was a spiritual growth that happened by my family, in my family, by my family being down there as American missionaries in Brazil. But after a few years, skills began to be honed, and I felt like a specialist. I felt like, using a modern or like an everyday term, like I felt like a special forces soldier in the kingdom of God. Like, hey, we could go in and we can deal with this, whatever this is. And I felt super confident again. And moving home, I felt confident that we could go into whatever environment and do all this again. And that was not the case, and it took a few years to learn that lesson too. But coming back home and saying, those things that I thought I was really good at down there aren't helping me here. So what's the difference? And I think there are some big differences between suburban Nashville ministry and metropolitan Brazil ministry. I would categorize it these are broad categories. Not everybody falls into this, right? But generally speaking, for spiritual growth, the Brazilians needed knowledge, right? So that Hebrews 6, you need milk and not solid food. Like, they had had a lot of milk and only milk, and they were needing someone to show them a more excellent way. They were like Apollos being ready, specifically those who were Pentecostal based.
Mm-hmm.
They were taught to love the word and respect the word, and they were excited about the word, but the word was more like an amulet or a piece of, they would carry their Bibles around, but they didn't know how to use them.
Yeah.
And so we became experts in helping them grow spiritually through knowledge, right? And you come back to the United States, and knowledge is abundant and proliferant. And in fact, everybody thinks they already know everything they need to know.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's true. Maybe they do know it all. Maybe you don't have to preach the whole gospel, because the gospel has been preached. People can sit down and read it. They study it. They listen to it. They go to lectureships, they podcasts. But what's missing stateside, and what I've struggled with in the past 8 years, is how to grow people experientially.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is the Brazilians came to the gospel already very in tune with the spiritual world, with spiritual battle, with relying and trusting on God for things that were out of their control, going to Him in times of turmoil, testing, and grief. And so experientially, they were already mature in some ways.
Mm.
And it was the knowledge that they were missing. They are missing. And I feel like Americans, at least in my bubble here in Tennessee, I believe they're proficient in knowledge, but it's the obedience, the experience, it's the practical, outside the pew living that we're struggling to grow in. And moving them to growth in that area is really difficult.
And I wonder if there's any connection that you saw between, you mentioned a lot of the people in Belém knew what poverty was like, knew what that experience was like. And then Americans, we often think of ourselves as more self-sufficient anyway. But then if we're in a context where maybe the poverty level's not quite the same, not to say Americans don't have needs and deal with it, but it's not quite the same level, where maybe we're not as used to thinking that we rely on God. We're pretty used to thinking we can rely on ourselves, and that's a hard thing sometimes to wrap our mind around.
I just kind of wonder what we call self-reliance or responsibility or even wisdom. I wonder sometimes, thinking about the parable of the sower, if Jesus wouldn't call them weeds.
Yeah.
Because he literally, when he's describing in Mark 4, he's describing the weed. He says, he literally uses the term deceitful riches. Like, you can be deceived by your riches. You can be deceived. They can trick you into thinking that you've got it all, that you're good, that you're where you need to be.
Right.
And interesting enough, those seeds grow up, and they're still the plants, they're still the plants they're supposed to be, but they don't do any benefit because they're surrounded by weeds. And maybe, just maybe, there are fewer weeds in the lives of people who are impoverished.
Yeah.
There's stuff, living at the Amazon in a tropical environment, things don't last very long. A car doesn't last long. A toy doesn't last long. I mean, you've got some toys here that people get when they're 5, and they can still have them when they're 55. But a toy down there, even a plastic toy, is not going to last, more than a couple of years, and things are just going to rust and fall apart and deteriorate. And
Just
get
'cause of the
moldy and mildew.
atmosphere
Yeah,
and
where moth and rust destroy is
that's true,
very
yeah.
real. Both
Yeah.
of those things happen all the time. And so stuff doesn't accumulate, it cycles through their lives.
That's interesting.
Where it accumulates in our lives. We've got these attics full and garages full and sheds full and storage units that we're renting full of things. And that's really hard for most people in the tropics to understand.
Yeah. I can remember even when you all were over there talking about books,
Mm-hmm.
about how
Yeah.
if books were left there and maybe if there's no air conditioning in the place where they're left, or just
Mm-hmm.
depending on that, all of a sudden things are
Mm-hmm.
falling apart and it's,
Yeah. Well, and speaking of books, you brought me on your trip down to Brazil, you brought me a Kindle.
Oh, yeah.
That was the first time I'd ever heard of a Kindle, first time I'd seen it. But that became a huge part of my ongoing ministry and learning was using the Kindle. But interesting enough, the Kindle, I went through 3 Kindles. After your first one, I went through 2 more because of the climate.
Yeah.
Those electronics just degrade because of the moisture in the air so fast. You go through computers twice as fast, cell phones twice as fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had not thought about how that would change your perspective on life if your things just wore out that quickly. Like, that is interesting, cycling through things.
Yeah.
And we'd certainly tend not to do that. As far as the differences in mindset, one thing I can remember you telling me, and this has become a story I think of when I think of culture shock, but you prepared us before we went to be ready to wait in lines.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember getting to the airport and we were waiting for another flight into Belém. And I thought I'll get us some water. And I stood in one line to get a bottle of water, and they handed me like a credit card size thing that I had to take to another line and hand to the person and get a bottle of water and then take back to the first line. And I just remember thinking, this is a lot of lines. This is not the way we're used to doing it. But of course, from their perspective, this is the way we've always done. Why would you do it any other way? All of us think that our way of doing things is the right. And I wondered too, have you noticed a difference in patience levels in the States and from Brazil from when you were there?
Probably, yeah. There's even a profession. It's not a very well paying one, but you can work all day, every day, going and standing in line for people that'll pay you to go stand in their place in line.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's a convenience that if you can afford it, it's a great thing to have somebody to go stand in line for you.
Stand in line like at a doctor's office?
Yeah.
Or
like at the bank or to pay your electric bill or to buy your bottle of water. No, I thought, to run an errand or like when they open up the box office at the theater or something, they're just people go stand in line and you can do it. Now, at the doctor's office, it doesn't work.
Right.
But that's completely different too. There's this whole system where you sit in a room and wait for your name to be called and everybody gets a number, and it's really awkward when everyone in the room has 5 names and they call you and it's like Nicholas Fowler and everybody looks like, who's this weirdo that only has 2 names?
Yeah. Only has the first and the last
name.
name.
What in the world?
That's funny.
What was the question again?
Well, I was just thinking about patience levels or like anything else you've noticed.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm sure ministry looks so different.
Yeah. I would say, I never thought about it, but Brazilians are patient. And part of that is because they're so community oriented. They're okay with waiting because they're going to be waiting with somebody.
Yeah.
Even people they don't know. It's fine because you get to talk and you're animated and engaged. I'm wondering how globalization is affecting that and cell phones.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they're still going to be as social as I remember them, because now you can put your head down on a phone in line.
Yeah.
But at the time we were there, people weren't stuck, their heads weren't stuck in phones. They would love to just talk, which made getting contacts and making contacts for ministry super easy.
Yeah.
We always had more contacts than we could deal with.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that does seem to be different, especially in different cultures. But I can imagine a lot of people who watching or listening have been on mission trips where you have an experience where there are people they'll sit down and tell you their whole life story and tell you their spiritual journey and tell you all kinds of things, even at times being very vulnerable with this person they've just met from another country. And it's harder to see that happening quickly in America.
Yeah.
You know, usually it takes a while to get to that point where someone's willing to lay all that out there.
If ever.
If ever.
Yeah.
So, that individual nature, has that changed the way in ministry? If you've got one group in Brazil, it's more community oriented. That probably has one impact on the way the church works together. And then in America, where sometimes we can be individual focused, that probably has a whole other set of challenges. So have you noticed anything in the differences of those, just in your experience as a group oriented or individual, and how that affects the church?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the way the gospel can flow through a community. In Brazil, well, we have a young man, he lives in Mount Juliet now, or Old Hickory, named Jefferson, and his grandmother was our first convert on the field in Brazil. Well, he didn't come along until we had been there 4 or 5 years. But then once he did, 13 more people were added to the church through his evangelistic efforts in his family.
Yeah.
So grandmother to grandson, and, you know, we actually just interviewed him for our church camp about, you know, him coming to Christ, because he was a teenager when it happened. He was like 16, 17 years old. And he talks about how after school he would go to his grandmother's house and they would have coffee, and he and his friends would talk with her about religious things. And they really went to talk with her to prove her wrong, because they thought she was all nuts for changing religions. And he ended up, I remember the day I met him was the day he showed up at my house wanting me to baptize him.
Oh, wow.
So he was the first person in the ministry down there that became a Christian that I didn't have to disciple and teach.
Yeah.
And then he went on to bring 13 more people to Christ before last year he moved to the United States. So almost everyone that obeyed the gospel had us come and work with their family for an extended period of time. And the family opened their house and homes to that.
Wow.
So that was pretty neat. And when we say family, you're going to get grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors. Some of it's curiosity, some of it's something to do. But a lot of it is, hey, one of our people feels strongly about this, like we need to pay attention and hear. And I don't see that in the States. Even here, I feel like sometimes you might have the attention of a husband, but you may never get the attention of the wife or the children or the parents, you know. So it's curious.
Yeah. Well, I think that also helps us understand even some biblical passages better when we realize they were written to communities that would have been very community oriented, other people oriented, whereas, you know, Western cultures tend to be much more of individualistic.
Yeah.
And that does help. I guess kind of as we are thinking about some of these thoughts, I want to give you a chance. Is there anything that you would say, like, based on your experience in Brazil and then coming back and doing ministry in America, is there anything you'd be like, I wish American Christians, you know, could have experienced this or could have seen this from my perspective? What are some things that when you talk to people, you'd want them to know that mission work has taught you?
I think what I would want people to know is the willingness to be simply obedient is easier when you have fewer things holding you to this world. And when you're, like a newborn babe, they take what you feed them. They might have some preferences, but for the most part, they're going to go where you take them. They're going to eat what you feed them. And that simplicity of obedience, not to me, but to the scriptures, is beautiful. And I feel like there's a culture in long-standing tradition around me specifically, that tries to justify our current way of life through the scriptures sometimes even, without, while finding a way around simple obedience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Here's an easy example. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, give to those who ask, right? 9 out of 10 Christians, I feel like this is not a Pew Research statistic, but I feel like 9 out of 10 are going to say, I'm not giving to them. And here's my reasons. They're going to use it for this, or it's not going to help them, and it's almost always justified by this idea that, well, God also wants me to be a good steward of his money. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but we're talking about $1 here. We're talking about 50 cents. Like, if God's hurting and for that, now maybe if all you've got's $1.
Yeah.
But I feel like simple obedience is Jesus said, give to those who ask.
Yeah.
And he didn't put any conditions. He didn't say, as long as they don't spend it on alcohol, as long as they don't, as long as they're legitimately in need. He just said, give to those. And so the Brazilians, my perception was they were much more willing to do simple obedience. And I feel like in the churches where we work today, you have to pull teeth to get them to do something different than what they would be comfortable doing.
Yeah.
Let me try to think of another example. Another example might be to love your wife or respect your husband, and God gives one reason for divorce. If they're unfaithful to you, he's going to give you a bye. You get to divorce if you need to in that situation. But today we can we can justify all kinds of reasons why God wouldn't want you to be around that person, or that person's not right for you, or and I'm just like, seriously, simple obedience this is the concept. And he didn't say it's supposed to be easy and comfortable and in alignment with what you've always thought. Now, I love working with teenagers, and I think teenage culture is a little bit different than adult, having been Christian for a long time culture. Somebody, and it's not me, somebody did say that 95% of people make their faith decision between the ages of 5 and 19. So if that's true, then maybe there's more of a mentality in young people like what I saw in Brazil. The other day, this summer, we were doing an intensive extra study during the week, and I remember one of our teenagers I think he's in 10th grade, kind of new to all this, being serious about following Christ stuff. And the question was something to the effect of, is there anything that Jesus asks you to do, or that God expects you to do, that goes against what you would want, or, what you've been taught? And he was very clear, this turn the other cheek thing. He brought that up, and he just said, I'll be honest, I'm at a place where I know that's what God is telling me to do, but everything in my flesh is telling me not to do it. And so even just hearing him admit that it was a battle was a win, I thought, because you ever feel like you preach week after week after week and you wonder, is this doing any good to anybody? There may be two types of learners. There may be the people who really are eager to hear the word and wrap their lives around the word. And there might be a group in our audience who just want us to pare it back to them what they think they already know. And the way you get a good job or a handshake at the end, that was a great sermon, is, well, you preached a sermon that really did agree with what I already thought. So good job. And that's not the kind of preaching I want to do at all. And so that's been the 8-year struggle, is preaching for life change. You remember like 20 years ago when the word change agent had a really bad connotation? But if you and I aren't always change agents every single Sunday, then what are we even doing up there? And I don't mean change agent in that sense.
No, I know what you mean.
But I just mean if the gospel is not changing your life, what am I doing? It's kind of what I think about that.
Well, I think you mentioned that simple obedience. Simple doesn't mean easy.
No.
And so, if we just simply doing what Scripture says, it's going to be really challenging. And we do find ways to rationalize certain things or get myself out of obligations. And I know personally, I'm pretty good at rationalizing away. Well, I really, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I've got these and that seems to be our tendency. And so just reminding ourselves that no, our tendency should be simple obedience. And if we have extenuating circumstances, we can deal with that, but that's not our default, and I think that is a challenge.
It won't ever be our default as long as we're sitting on the thrones of our lives. You see,
the obedience.
If God is on the throne and we are subject to it, then how can you be in the presence of God, know God, and have him on the throne of your life and not just automatically do what he wants you to do, simply, without question? But as long as we sit the throne, we're going to be falling short a lot.
And what is it that everybody does when they come into the presence of God in Scripture? Is you fall down. No one has to tell you who's in charge. We know. And so, that's hugely important for us. And I appreciate you being willing to share your experiences and perspective. And I think it's good for us to step out of our own circumstances and look at things and say, hey, here's what 8 years in another culture with other challenges can teach us even about the way we live and the culture we live in, and kind of look at that with fresh eyes. So appreciate so much you being with us, and appreciate everybody who's joined us for this conversation. We keep hearing from people that are appreciating this. You can subscribe to this on our YouTube channel. You can listen to it on Spotify, and I think pretty much anywhere else. I'm looking at Chad to see anywhere else you can get podcasts. If you can't find it, let us know. But yeah, we definitely, anytime we can see subscriptions and people watching and viewing, it's encouraging to us. And so we hope it's encouraging to you. As always, if you are in the Murray County area and you don't have a church home, we'd love for you to come and to worship with us. And if you are ever in the Nolensville area, or if you're listening to this in the Nolensville area, and you don't have a church home, the Mill Creek congregation would love for you to stop by there and talk with them and see how we can encourage you. Thank you for being with us in Connections. Thank you for being part of Connections. We hope it was an encouragement to you. If you live in the Columbia area and don't have a church home, we would love for you to worship with us. You can find out information about meeting times, classes, and what to expect at Graymere.com. You will always receive a warm welcome from the Graymere Church of Christ.